Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. Ezekiel Smith wasn't born into wealth or privilege. Everything he had, he earned through grit, perseverance, and an unwavering belief that hard work paid off. From a young age, Ezekiel understood that nothing in life would be handed to him. If he wanted a future, he'd have to build it from the ground up. And that's exactly what he did. By the time he reached his 40s, Ezekiel had built a thriving business brick by brick, deal by deal. Success didn't come easy, but he had fought tooth and nail for it. And now, the rewards were pouring in. The money was good. The respect was better. Life, it seemed, had finally rewarded his sacrifices. But if you asked Ezekiel what his greatest accomplishment was, he wouldn't point to his company or his bank account. He'd smile and say one word: family. At the heart of that family was his wife, Elizabeth Smith, Liz, as he called her. And Liz was unforgettable. She had a presence that lit up every room she walked into. Her long, flowing hair, dazzling smile, and a figure that turned heads wherever she went made her impossible to ignore. But for Ezekiel, it wasn't just about looks. What drew him and what really captivated him was her mind. Liz was smart, sharp, ambitious in a way that made Ezekiel feel like he'd met his match. The moment they met, something clicked. "You always this charming?" Liz had asked with a teasing smile, swirling her wine glass during their first dinner together. Ezekiel had grinned. "Only when I'm sitting across from someone who makes me forget my own name." She laughed, rich and genuine. That laugh stayed with him long after the night ended. They dated, and the connection deepened. Love grew fast but strong. Friends said it felt like watching a real-life fairy tale unfold. And when Ezekiel finally proposed, there was no hesitation. Their wedding was the stuff of dreams, grand, elegant, and talked about for months. Guests left believing in soulmates again. Soon after, their son Ryan was born. From the moment he held that tiny baby in his arms, Ezekiel knew what his purpose was. Ryan became his everything. Every early morning meeting, every late night at the office, every deal signed, it was all for them. For Liz. For Ryan. For the life they were building together. But Ezekiel's world didn't begin with his wife and child. Before them, there was someone else who had been by his side through every trial and triumph: Wesley Jones. Wesley wasn't just a friend. He was Ezekiel's brother in every way but blood. The two had grown up on the same block, scraped their knees on the same sidewalks, and fought the same neighborhood bullies. They were there for each other through thick and thin schoolyard crushes, broken bones, heartbreaks, and dreams. They'd graduated together, celebrated every win, and leaned on each other during the losses. When Ezekiel decided to take the leap and start his own business, there was no question who he'd turn to. "You in?" Ezekiel asked one late night, hunched over blueprints and market research at his cramped kitchen table. Wesley didn't even blink. "I was in before you asked." That was all Ezekiel needed to hear. From that point on, Wesley wasn't just a supporter, he was a full-fledged partner. Wesley Jones knew Ezekiel Smith better than anyone. He knew his deepest hopes, the fears he rarely voiced, the goals he chased with relentless focus. If you saw Ezekiel, chances were Wesley wasn't far behind. To the outside world, their bond was unshakable, brothers not by blood, but by life. And Ezekiel? He seemed to have it all. A stunning wife, a beautiful child, a thriving business, a best friend who stood beside him through it all. To the world, Ezekiel Smith was living the American dream. But dreams have shadows. And perfect pictures? They often hide the cracks just beneath the surface. Behind the polished family portraits and glowing anniversary posts was a reality much harder to frame: a marriage quietly unraveling. The smiling selfies? They couldn't capture the silences between them. The vacations? They didn't show the emotional distance growing wider with each passing year. Elizabeth Smith was never just Ezekiel's trophy wife. She was intelligent, ambitious, and driven in her own right. In the early days, she admired Ezekiel's work ethic. She respected his ambition and how tirelessly he worked to build something lasting for their family. But as the years wore on, admiration gave way to frustration. Early mornings became late nights. Even on weekends, Ezekiel's mind was elsewhere, on spreadsheets, emails, client calls. Physically present but emotionally vacant. One evening, as Ezekiel sat on the couch, typing furiously on his laptop, Elizabeth sat across from him, arms folded. "Zeke," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Yeah. We haven't had a real conversation in weeks." "We're talking now," he muttered, still typing. "No, you're talking to your screen. I'm talking to your shadow." He finally looked up, his brow furrowed. "I'm doing this for us, Liz. For Ryan. For you." She stood up. "I don't need a provider, Ezekiel. I need a partner." He didn't know how to respond. To him, love was action, sacrifice, provision. But to Elizabeth, it had become something hollow. And that's when Wesley's presence began to shift. Wesley had always been around trusted, familiar, a constant in their lives. He came over for dinner, played with Ryan, helped out when needed. For years, Elizabeth had seen him as a friend. Nothing more. But now, something felt different. Wesley started lingering a little longer after Ezekiel left for work. He offered to help with errands. When Elizabeth wore a new dress one evening, Ezekiel barely glanced at her. "But Wesley, you look incredible, Liz," he said, smiling in a way that lingered a beat too long. She blinked. "Thanks, it's just something I pulled from the back of the closet." "Well, it's working," he replied. The compliments, the attention, it all felt innocent enough. But Elizabeth noticed how he looked at her, how he really listened when she spoke. One afternoon, while Ezekiel was at a late meeting, Elizabeth sat on the porch, sipping coffee. Wesley joined her, setting down 2 mugs. "I brought you a fresh cup," he said. "Figured you could use a break." She smiled. "You always know when I need one." There was a pause. "You doing okay?" he asked. Elizabeth looked away. "Honestly, no. I feel invisible." Wesley nodded. "He's lucky to have you, Liz. He always has been." And in that moment, quiet and intimate, something shifted between them. Elizabeth began looking forward to the days Wesley came over. She'd spend more time getting ready, put on a touch of perfume, maybe straighten the house a little more than usual. She found herself opening up to him, telling him things she no longer felt comfortable sharing with her own husband. Wesley listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He just saw her. What Elizabeth didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Wesley had been carrying something deep inside for years. A secret he had buried beneath loyalty and guilt. He had loved her from the start. He had watched Ezekiel fall in love, propose, marry her, and had stood beside them, hiding his own heartache. He had swallowed his feelings for the sake of their friendship, convinced that what he felt would fade. But now, as Elizabeth leaned on him, as her marriage frayed at the edges, and she turned to him not just as a friend, but as a confidant, those long-buried emotions surged back to the surface. It began quietly, almost innocently. An emotional affair formed in the spaces Ezekiel didn't occupy long, private conversations during quiet afternoons, or whispered confessions late at night when the house had settled into silence. Their connection deepened in the shadows, beyond what either of them dared admit at first. Late-night texts became a ritual. "Elizabeth, can't sleep again. Just lying here, thinking." Wesley, about him. "Elizabeth, about everything. I feel like I don't exist anymore." "Wesley, you do. To me, you always have." At dinners, when the 3 of them sat together, Ezekiel, unknowingly flanked by betrayal glances, passed between Elizabeth and Wesley. Lingering, unspoken, dangerous. They played their parts well, laughed when appropriate, passed the salt, pretended. But then came the night everything changed. Ezekiel was out of town on business. A late meeting, a hotel room miles away, his thoughts buried in profit margins and client calls. As usual, Wesley came by to check on Elizabeth and Ryan, to be helpful, supportive. Just like always. Once Ryan was tucked into bed and the house had quieted, Elizabeth poured 2 glasses of wine. She and Wesley sat on the living room couch, the air between them thick with all the things left unsaid. Elizabeth stared at her glass. "Do you ever feel like you're screaming, but no one hears you?" Wesley looked at her carefully. "All the time." She let out a tired laugh. "He's not a bad man, Wesley. He's just gone. Even when he's here, he's not really here. I don't know when I stopped being his wife and became just someone he provides for." Wesley shifted closer. "You're not invisible to me, Liz. You never have been." She turned to him, surprised. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not just saying it," he said. "I've loved you for years. I just never had the right to tell you." Her eyes widened. A silence fell between them. And then, just like that, lines blurred and boundaries shattered. That night, they crossed the threshold they had danced around for weeks. What began as stolen glances and lingering words turned physical. The affair began not in a flurry of passion, but in vulnerability, in longing, in the illusion that something broken could be mended in secret. And the thing about affairs? They're rarely just about lust or loneliness. They become sanctuaries, hidden, intoxicating, a world apart from reality. And that's what Elizabeth and Wesley created, a secret space that made everything else feel dull by comparison. With each encounter, Elizabeth began to feel alive again. No longer just a mother. No longer just a wife lost in her husband's shadow. While Ezekiel stayed late at the office, Wesley would come by. When Ezekiel traveled, Wesley stayed the night. They perfected their lies until they could tell them without hesitation, without guilt. But something shifted. What began as a release became a dream. A future. A fantasy. They started imagining a life together without Ezekiel. One where they could go out in public, hold hands without looking over their shoulders, live openly, freely, and deeply in love. On a quiet night, lying together in Elizabeth's bed, the one she once shared with Ezekiel, she whispered, "What if this didn't have to be a secret anymore?" Wesley stared at the ceiling. "You mean, really be together? No more hiding?" She nodded slowly. "Wouldn't that be better than sneaking around for the rest of our lives?" It was then that Wesley remembered a detail Ezekiel had once mentioned offhandedly years ago when they were both sitting in his home office, going over financial planning. "I took out a life insurance policy," Ezekiel had said, tapping a folder. $1 million. "If anything happens to me, Liz and Ryan will be okay." Wesley had nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. But now it echoed. He turned the thought over in his mind. If anything happens to me, Liz and Ryan will be okay. Elizabeth was the sole beneficiary. Of course she was. Ezekiel had trusted her with everything. And he had trusted Wesley. Wesley knew about the policy. Knew Ezekiel was even considering increasing it with the business thriving. And somewhere deep inside, a thought flickered. What if Ezekiel wasn't around anymore? What if fate gave them an opening? Elizabeth would be free. She'd have $1 million. They could start again somewhere new. No more lies. No more pretending. At first, it was just that, a thought. Dark. Fleeting. The kind of idea you push away the moment it appears. But the more they dreamed of a future together, the more that idea refused to stay buried. It started to feel real. Tangible. Elizabeth had gone so far down the path, she could no longer see where it began. Her life had split in two. One public, polished version where she smiled next to Ezekiel at company dinners and kissed him goodbye each morning. And the other secret, intimate, dangerous, where she lay beside Wesley, whispering dreams of escape. And yet, guilt never truly settled in her chest. She convinced herself she was the one betrayed. Ezekiel had built walls of work around himself and locked her out. He had chosen boardrooms over bedrooms, contracts over connection. He hadn't seen her for years, not really. Not the way Wesley did. "He stopped choosing me," she told Wesley one night as they lay in bed, shadows pooling across the sheets. Wesley brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then maybe he doesn't deserve you." Elizabeth looked up at him, her voice barely audible. Maybe he never did. Wesley was caught in a storm of conflict. His whole life, Ezekiel had been his anchor, his brother in all but blood. They'd shared childhood memories, secrets, milestones. And now, he was planning to destroy the very man who had given him everything. But that other voice inside him, quiet, persistent, kept whispering. He took her for granted. You would have cherished her. You do. And as the affair deepened, so did their fantasies. Their conversations shifted. No longer just stolen kisses and midnight texts, but future plans. A new city. A new life. The three of them, Elizabeth, Wesley, and Ryan, free from the lies and burden of Ezekiel's presence. One evening, curled up together in the living room while Ryan slept upstairs, Elizabeth stared into the distance and murmured, "Sometimes I wonder what it'd be like if he just disappeared." Wesley glanced at her, tension creeping into his jaw. "You mean, like for good?" She didn't look at him. "It would solve everything, wouldn't it?" There was a silence. Then Wesley gave a hollow chuckle. "Maybe he'll have a little accident someday." Elizabeth smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't soften. Maybe. At first, they played it off as dark humor, unspoken tension dressed in sarcasm. But over time, the veil thinned. They started talking seriously. Quiet, calculated, chilling. Elizabeth, his business trips, no one checks on him. If something happened, no one would know for hours. Wesley, he jogs at night. Same path every time. Alone. Elizabeth, and he always answers when you call. As Elizabeth dug into the life insurance policy, she discovered everything she needed. There was a 2-year contestability clause, already expired. The payout was clean, with no restrictions under accidental death. She understood what documentation was needed, what red flags might arise, what loopholes existed. She never said the word murder. She didn't have to. Wesley, meanwhile, began studying Ezekiel's habits with surgical focus, his routes, his routines, his vulnerabilities. And most importantly, the depth of his trust. "Zeke would follow me anywhere," Wesley told her one night. "If I told him to meet me at midnight in the middle of nowhere, he'd be there." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time we stop pretending this is just a fantasy." And somewhere between the late-night whispers and the unspoken promises, they realized they had the perfect opportunity. Everything Ezekiel had built, everything he believed in, everything he loved, it could all be erased in a single move. But the darkest truth had yet to be revealed. Ryan, the boy Ezekiel adored, the child he'd given everything for, his reason for working late, for sacrificing time, for building a future. Ryan wasn't even his. Wesley had known it. Elizabeth had known it. The secret had been buried beneath years of lies. She had been sleeping with Wesley before she ever walked down the aisle. When she got pregnant, she chose the safer option, the easier one. She let Ezekiel believe the child was his. He never questioned her, never once doubted. From the first moment he held that boy, Ezekiel had loved him with the ferocity of a real father. He taught Ryan to ride a bike, took him to every doctor appointment, showed up to school plays and football games, beaming with pride. "That's my son," he would say to anyone who asked. "That's my heart." And every word he said, every hug, every sacrifice, it was all unconditional. All the while, the truth sat inside Elizabeth like a slow-acting poison. Every time Ezekiel smiled proudly and said Ryan had his eyes, every time he talked about sending him to college, coaching his baseball games, shaping his future, it was another twist of the knife. Another reminder of the foundation of lies their life was built on. She'd watch him from across the room, see the way his face lit up when Ryan laughed, the way he tucked him in at night, the way he whispered, "I love you, son," like it was the only truth that mattered. But Elizabeth knew the truth. And now, with the affair reignited and the plan in motion, that secret no longer filled her with guilt, it gave her resolve. In her mind, she wasn't taking something that belonged to Ezekiel. She was reclaiming it. Ryan was Wesley's son. Wesley was her real partner. Wesley deserved to be the father. "This isn't betrayal," she whispered to herself one night as she stood over Ryan's bed, watching him sleep. "It's fixing what never should have been broken." And from that twisted seed of logic, the plan took deeper root. They shaped it carefully, waiting for the moment when Ezekiel would be isolated, when there'd be no witnesses, no trail leading back to them. Wesley would handle the logistics. Elizabeth would play the grieving widow. They practiced their parts, went over the timeline, smoothed the cracks. "Once it happens," Elizabeth said one evening, voice hushed over the phone, "we wait a few months. Then we ease into it. Let people see us grieving. Let them believe we found comfort in each other." "No one would question it," Wesley replied. "I'm his best friend. They'd expect me to help you through it." "Exactly," she said. "No one would suspect a thing." But between fantasy and execution was a chasm they hadn't yet crossed. The plan was written, rehearsed, but it still existed in theory. They hadn't yet stepped into action. That changed one Thursday night in October. Ezekiel was pushing through another late evening at the office. Papers scattered across his desk. A half-eaten sandwich by the keyboard. He rubbed his eyes and leaned back, exhaustion clouding his focus, but pride still flickering beneath the fatigue. If this deal went through, it could change everything. He thought of Elizabeth, of Ryan. "This is for them," he told himself. His phone buzzed. "Wesley, hey man, you sound wiped. Come grab a drink with me, just like old times." Ezekiel hesitated. He looked at the time. 9:07 p.m. He wanted to go home, kiss Ryan goodnight, curl up next to Elizabeth. But Wesley sounded sincere, maybe even a little anxious. "I don't know," Ezekiel said. "I've got a lot to finish. Might just call it a night." "Come on," Wesley urged. "One drink. You need to unwind. Plus, there's something I want to talk to you about. It's important." Ezekiel paused. This was his best friend. His brother. "All right," he said finally. "One drink." They met at a quiet bar just outside town. Dim lights, wood-paneled walls, a few scattered regulars hunched over their drinks. No one paid them much attention. Ezekiel ordered a beer. Wesley took a whiskey neat. They made small talk, laughed a little, recalled college antics and early business struggles. But something about Wesley felt off. He kept checking his phone. His foot tapped incessantly beneath the table. His eyes kept drifting toward the door. "You good?" Ezekiel asked, tilting his head. "You seem jumpy." "Yeah," Wesley said quickly. "Just some personal stuff. Been a long week." Ezekiel nodded, sipping his beer. "Tell me about it." They stayed for just under an hour. Then Wesley leaned forward, eyes suddenly serious. "Listen," he said, "I've been meaning to show you something. A new property I found might be perfect for expanding the business." "Now?" Ezekiel asked, frowning. "It's late." "It won't take long," Wesley assured him. "It's a drive, but worth it. Across the state line, just a couple hours. We can be there and back before midnight." "It's worth the drive," Wesley said again, his voice firm but coaxing. "This could be huge for us." Ezekiel hesitated, rubbing his temples. He was tired, bone-deep tired, but Wesley looked so certain, so eager. Ezekiel didn't want to let him down. He'd been neglecting their friendship, he knew that. Maybe this was his chance to make up for it. "All right," he said. "Let's go." They got into Wesley's car and pulled away from the quiet bar, driving toward the state line. The sky was pitch black now, dotted with faint stars, and the road stretched ahead like a dark ribbon. As the miles slipped past, Ezekiel began to feel strange. His head throbbed, and a heavy fog started to settle behind his eyes. He blinked hard, trying to shake it off. "I don't feel so good," he muttered, slumped against the seat. Like really off. Wesley's grip on the wheel tightened. You're probably just exhausted, he said quickly. Long day. You've been pushing hard lately. Ezekiel nodded slowly, but his limbs were starting to feel like they weren't his own. His thoughts came slower now, muddled and drifting. He didn't know that the whiskey Wesley had bought him at the bar was laced with a powerful sedative. They crossed the state line and turned off the main road, following a narrow, winding path that led to a secluded spot near a river, quiet, isolated, perfect. By the time Wesley parked the car, Ezekiel could barely lift his head. Why are we here? He slurred, his words thick. This doesn't look like business. Wesley stepped out first, walking around to Ezekiel's side. He opened the door and helped him out, practically dragging him toward the edge of the riverbank. Just take it easy, Wesley whispered. His voice shook despite himself. Just let go. Ezekiel collapsed to his knees, dizzy and confused, eyes fluttering open and shut. Then he saw at Wesley's hand, reaching into his coat. A flash of silver. A gun. His gaze lifted, unfocused, but he locked eyes with Wesley. Pure confusion and heartbreak filled his expression. Wes, he rasped. What are you? Wesley's hand trembled. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. This was the man who had stood beside him through everything. The man who called him brother. The man who had loved his son, Wesley's son, without question. I'm sorry, Wesley whispered. I'm so sorry. He closed his eyes and pulled the trigger. The gunshot split the night. The bullet hit Ezekiel in the side of the head, slicing across the skull in a brutal, glancing blow. Blood sprayed instantly. Ezekiel crumpled to the ground. Wesley stood frozen, the sound of the shot still ringing in his ears. His hands shaking violently, the gun now impossibly heavy. He knelt beside Ezekiel's body, pressing trembling fingers to the neck. No pulse. Or maybe he just couldn't find it. There was so much blood. It's done, he told himself. In a daze, Wesley dragged the limp body to the edge of the river. The current was swift, black, and merciless. He let go. Ezekiel's body hit the icy water and disappeared into the darkness. What Wesley didn't know was that the shot hadn't killed him. The bullet had carved a deep, bleeding channel along Ezekiel's skull, but hadn't penetrated his brain. The freezing water sent Ezekiel's body into immediate shock, slowing everything: his breathing, his heart rate. To Wesley, he had looked dead, but Ezekiel was alive. Miles downstream, the current finally pushed Ezekiel's body against a fallen tree branch jutting out into the water. He caught there, tangled and unmoving, blood still leaking into the river. Hours passed. At dawn, a jogger spotted something strange near the bank, something pale and limp tangled in the reeds. She gasped when she realized it was a man. Oh my God, she shouted, fumbling for her phone. Hello? Yes, I need an ambulance. There's a man. He's hurt. He's not moving by the riverbank off Route 3. Paramedics arrived quickly, assessing the scene. The man was barely breathing, unconscious and soaked in blood. He was rushed to the hospital, listed as critical and unidentified. In the emergency room, doctors fought to save his life. One look at the wound, and they called for trauma surgery. Massive laceration to the skull. He's lost a lot of blood. We need to get in and relieve the pressure now. The team worked fast, cutting away what was left of the soaked clothing, prepping the man for surgery. The bullet had fractured the outer plate of the skull and caused swelling that threatened to crush his brain from the inside. He was rushed into the operating room. Scalpels gleamed under sterile lights. Monitors beeped steadily. And with steady, practiced hands, the lead surgeon began to relieve the pressure and stop the bleeding. Ezekiel remained in a coma for 3 days, suspended in a fog of silence and sterile light. When he finally opened his eyes, the nurses rushed to his side, astonished that he had survived at all. Can you hear me? One of them asked gently, leaning over his bruised and bandaged face. His eyes flicked toward her, glassy and unfocused. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He blinked. Once. Twice. Do you know your name? She asked, her voice even softer now. He stared blankly, brows knitting together in confusion. The question meant nothing. Everything felt foreign, alien. Panic flickered in his dull gaze. The attending physician was called in. After a series of tests and scans, the diagnosis was clear: traumatic amnesia. His memory, personal, long-term, even basic details had been obliterated by the blunt force trauma to his skull. He doesn't know who he is, the doctor explained quietly to the staff gathered outside the room. Not his name, not his family, nothing. It's a clean slate. And there's no ID, no wallet, nothing to link him back to anyone. Wesley had made sure of that. He had taken Ezekiel's wallet from his coat, removed any identification, and tossed it into the river, just another detail in the careful staging of a robbery gone wrong. The hospital checked every avenue: fingerprints, missing persons, regional databases. But there was no match. Ezekiel's prints weren't in any system. And since he had been found across the state line, the authorities there had no connection to the missing persons report filed in his home jurisdiction. "We've hit a dead end," a detective said with a sigh, flipping through a folder of blank leads. No ID, no matches, and nobody coming to claim him. It's like he dropped out of the sky. Meanwhile, back home, Elizabeth was already playing her part. That morning, she called the local police department, her voice tight with panic. "He didn't come home," she cried. "He always calls always. Something's wrong. I know it." An officer tried to calm her, asking questions. "When did you last see him, ma'am?" "Last night. He went out with his best friend, Wesley. Just for a drink, that's all. He said he'd be home before 10. Wesley, standing nearby, took the phone when prompted. "Yeah, we were together," he said, sounding grave but measured. "We had a couple drinks." He seemed off, stressed. He got this call. He stepped outside to take it. When he came back, he looked worried. Then he just left. "Left?" the officer asked. "Did he say where he was going?" "No, just said he needed to handle something. Honestly, I thought he just needed space. I didn't expect this." Wesley's tone was perfect, concerned, but confused. Hurt, but rational. He hinted at vague business troubles, suggested maybe Ezekiel was being threatened, maybe he owed someone money. It was a subtle deflection, and it worked. The police began to follow that theory. When Ezekiel's car was discovered abandoned near the river, with blood on the driver's seat and the window smashed from the inside, it confirmed their suspicions: robbery or targeted violence. Elizabeth clung to the narrative with unflinching devotion. She appeared on the local news that evening, her face pale and drawn. "If anyone knows anything at all, please come forward," she said, choking on the last word. "He's a good man, a good father. He wouldn't just disappear." She organized search efforts, mobilized the community. Cameras captured her clinging to a framed photo of Ezekiel and Ryan, eyes red-rimmed, voice shaking. The public rallied around her. She was the grieving wife. The story was tragic and believable. Wesley remained at her side through it all. He helped her organize the vigils. He hugged her in front of reporters. He picked up Ryan from school, stood by Elizabeth during press conferences, and reassured everyone that they were doing everything they could. But behind closed doors, behind the masks they wore in public, he and Elizabeth were already quietly and coldly aligning the next steps. They were, at last, secretly planning a future with her. For 2 long months, hope slowly drained from the investigation. With no fresh leads, no sightings, and no body recovered, the police reluctantly reclassified Ezekiel's disappearance as a presumed homicide. The theory was straightforward: a robbery gone wrong. A successful businessman, missing without a trace, his blood found in his abandoned car near a river. It was tragic, but plausible. Elizabeth played her role to perfection. She wept during interviews, clutched framed photographs, and whispered about closure. When the insurance paperwork was filed, there was nothing overtly suspicious, no immediate red flags. "Everything lines up," the claims investigator eventually reported. He had no enemies on record. There was evidence of a violent encounter. No financial motive from the wife. Payouts justified. 6 months after Ezekiel's disappearance, the $1 million policy was approved and transferred to Elizabeth's account. With the money secured, Elizabeth and Wesley exercised caution. They didn't flaunt their relationship, not yet. But behind closed doors, their life together deepened. The secret they shared bound them even tighter than passion ever could. 1 year later, Elizabeth announced that she and Wesley had found comfort in one another. "It wasn't something we expected," she said softly during a local news interview, "but grief brought us closer. He's been my rock." 2 years after the disappearance, they were married in a private ceremony, no fanfare, no public spectacle. Just a quiet union, masked in solemnity and framed as healing. They moved into a gated community in an affluent suburb. Elizabeth embraced her new lifestyle with abandoned driving luxury vehicles, draping herself in designer clothes and sparkling jewelry. Wesley walked away from the business he'd once built with Ezekiel, no longer needing the income. The insurance money funded their life of comfort and indulgence. Ryan, now older, never questioned the narrative. Dad was killed by bad people, he told classmates at school, believing it completely. Wesley was the only father figure he knew, present, caring, attentive. The truth was buried under years of lies, whispered between Elizabeth and Wesley like a secret prayer. To the outside world, they were inspirational. "They've been through so much," people often said. "And look at them now. They survived." But the glossy image masked something foul. Their home, their marriage, their fortune, every bit of it rested on betrayal and murder. Far from the manicured lawns of their new neighborhood, Ezekiel lived like a ghost. The man once known as Ezekiel awoke every day into confusion. He had no name, no home, and no past. 7 years slipped by like fog. Shelters became his only refuge. Park benches and alleyways his resting places. The world blurred around him, faces, buildings, sounds. Nothing stayed. Nothing connected. He didn't know who he was, but he had flashes, dreams of a laughing child, a warm smile, a woman's touch followed by something darker. Shadows. Pain. Sometimes, as he stared into a cracked mirror in a shelter bathroom, he whispered to his reflection, "Who the hell are you?" No answer ever came. When the pressure of it all built too much, he turned to the only escape he could find. Alcohol numbed the pain. Drugs dulled the edge. Each hit offered a moment of peace, a quiet reprieve from the storm inside. "I'm nobody," he muttered one night, slumped beside a dumpster behind a diner. A fellow drifter handed him a bottle. "You got smarts, man," the man said, watching Ezekiel repair a broken pipe under the sink in exchange for leftover food. "How'd you learn this stuff?" Ezekiel just shrugged. "I don't know," he said quietly, eyes distant. "I didn't remember learning them." During those lost years, Ezekiel descended into darkness so deep, it swallowed whole any sense of hope or identity. He cycled through arrests for loitering, public drunkenness, disorderly conduct. Police reports bore no name, just the same note. Unidentified male, transient. Twice, he nearly died, once from alcohol poisoning, another time from an overdose on a frigid winter night behind a closed-down pharmacy. There were nights he begged for the pain to stop. He stared at the ceiling of shelters and muttered to himself in a low rasp, "Why am I still here?" But even when the weight of not knowing who he was crushed his spirit, something primal kept him moving. A whisper in his gut, soft but unrelenting. "There's more. You matter. Someone's waiting." Then, 7 years after that night near the river, Ezekiel stood outside a halfway house with a duffel bag and trembling hands, and he made a decision. Enough. He checked himself into a rehab facility, broke through withdrawal and shame, and faced the slow, brutal work of healing. It wasn't noble. It was messy, agonizing, full of doubt. But day by day, he clawed his way forward. And as the toxins left his body and the haze lifted, something unexpected happened. His dreams changed. At first, they were just flashes. A boy's laughter echoing. A woman's silhouette in a sunlit kitchen. The sound of a name, Ryan. The fragments came like pieces of a puzzle dumped on a table. Then, one morning on a job site he'd taken day labor on a construction crew, a coworker called out, "Ezekiel, grab that ladder." He turned instinctively. When he realized what he'd done, he froze. He hadn't gone by Ezekiel in years. He'd introduced himself as Dan, short for John Doe, the name the hospital had used. But something about hearing Ezekiel struck a chord deep in his chest. That night, he lay awake on a cot, whispering the name to himself. Ezekiel. Ezekiel Smith. He didn't know where it came from, but it felt right. The final breakthrough came on a quiet afternoon. He was on break, sipping coffee in the shelter lounge when a local news report played on the small TV above. A cold case segment, a missing businessman from years ago. Ezekiel's eyes locked on the screen. A picture flashed, a younger version of himself. The name, Ezekiel Smith. He stared, mouth slightly open, chest tight. As the reporter recounted the case, a presumed robbery, a car by the river, a grieving wife, images flooded him. Being in a car, feeling dizzy, a hand on the wheel. Then Wesley's face. A gun, a flash. He dropped the coffee cup. It shattered on the floor. "Oh my God," he whispered, clutching his head. "Wesley, Liz, Ryan." His breath came in shallow gasps as memories poured in. His wedding day, the birth of his son, business meetings, laughing with Wesley, holding Liz's hand. Then betrayal. Cold metal. Pain. His name was Ezekiel Smith. He had a family, a life, and they had stolen it from him. Over the next few weeks, Ezekiel began piecing it together. He scoured libraries, public records, and old news archives. He found the original missing person reports, interviews with Elizabeth, Wesley's quotes, the staged heartbreak. Then came the obituary declared legally dead. Then a wedding announcement. Liz had married Wesley 2 years after he disappeared. He found photos online. Liz, radiant in a designer dress. Wesley in a tailored suit. The caption read, "A new chapter after tragedy." There was Ryan, too, older, taller, smiling beside Wesley with the easy comfort of a boy posing next to the man he called Dad. Ezekiel stared at the screen, hollow. "They killed me," he said aloud in a stunned, broken whisper. "They killed me, and they took everything." His voice trembled. "My life, my son, my name." And while he'd spent 7 years cold, hungry, and forgotten, they had been smiling in photos, wrapped in luxury, enjoying the fruits of his labor. The family Ezekiel had once built, the home, the son he raised, the future he had sacrificed so much for, none of it had ever truly belonged to him. It had been a mirage, a carefully constructed lie built on betrayal. The grief in his chest simmered into rage, but beneath that storm was something sharper, steadier, resolve. He was going to reveal the truth. He was going to get justice, and he was going to take back the life that had been stolen from him. But Ezekiel knew he couldn't just walk up to Elizabeth and Wesley's door, announce he was alive, and expect anything but danger. They believed he was dead, and if they saw him now, if they realized their secret was unraveling, they might panic. They might try again to finish what they started. So he planned. He moved cautiously. His appearance had changed. Years on the streets had left him lean, with weathered skin and sunken cheeks, but he still bore the unmistakable scar along his scalp where the bullet had grazed him. Other details, 2 birthmarks, healed fractures, dental records could confirm his identity. He was ready. Ezekiel walked into the police station and requested to speak to someone about a cold case his own. A uniformed officer behind the desk gave him a quick once-over, then gestured for him to take a seat. Detective Rachel Monroe met with him, clipboard in hand, her expression neutral but slightly guarded. "You said you have information about a missing person?" "I'm not here to talk about someone else," Ezekiel said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here because I am the missing person. Ezekiel Smith, presumed dead 7 years ago." She blinked, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. "Mr. Smith is deceased. I can prove I'm not." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, let's talk." As they sat down in a small interview room, Ezekiel began sharing his story. His words were measured but precise. He spoke about the night he disappeared, about the business he co-owned, about Elizabeth, about Wesley, about the insurance policy. He described details from the office layout to the way Wesley used to sign contracts. He even recalled a conversation from a week before the incident, one where Wesley had grown distant, talking vaguely about opportunities that come from tragedy. Detective Monroe listened in silence at first, but as the specifics piled up, details that hadn't been released to the public, her skepticism shifted to curiosity, then to concern. "You remember all of this clearly?" she asked. "It's coming back in pieces," Ezekiel replied. "But enough has returned. Enough to know who I am and who tried to kill me." They ran his fingerprints. Hours passed in tense silence. Finally, Monroe returned with a folder in her hands. Her face was pale. "You are Ezekiel Smith," she confirmed. "Your prints match. You were declared legally dead years ago." Ezekiel leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then let's begin." But the detective's tone turned cautious. "Mr. Smith, proving your identity is one thing. Proving attempted murder, after 7 years, with no forensic evidence left, that's a much harder task. Your memory is fragmented. Their alibi held up. You were declared dead based on what looked like a robbery gone wrong, without direct proof." "I understand," Ezekiel interrupted. "But they made mistakes. I remember things now. Conversations, moments that didn't make sense at the time." He described a phone call Wesley had taken in hushed tones, telling someone he's starting to suspect. And a night Elizabeth had asked him to increase his life insurance, playing it off as security for Ryan. "Those weren't coincidences," Ezekiel said. "They were planning it." A few days later, Ezekiel stood in front of a familiar building, glass doors, polished steel letters on the front, W&L Strategic Consulting. Wesley had renamed the firm after Ezekiel's disappearance. It stood on the bones of what they'd built together. Inside, the receptionist looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Ezekiel said quietly. "But he'll want to see me." Moments later, Wesley opened the door to his office, holding a coffee mug and a smile that froze instantly when his eyes met Ezekiel's. The mug slipped from Wesley's hand, shattering on the floor. He stumbled backward, eyes wide with terror. "No, no, you're dead. I saw you die." Ezekiel stepped into the room and quietly shut the door behind him. His movements were calm, deliberate, like a man with nothing left to fear. "You saw me get shot, Wesley," he said, voice low and unwavering. "But you didn't stick around long enough to make sure I was actually dead." Wesley's chest heaved as he struggled to breathe, a pale sheen of sweat covering his face. He gripped the edge of the desk as though it were the only thing anchoring him to reality, his eyes wide and wild. All the years he had spent convincing himself it had been necessary, all the lies he had swallowed to quiet his conscience, none of it mattered now. Ezekiel stood before him, very much alive, and the truth had nowhere left to hide. "I'm sorry," Wesley gasped. "God, Ezekiel, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. It was Elizabeth's idea. She said you didn't love her anymore. She said you'd be better off dead than stuck in a loveless marriage." Ezekiel's eyes darkened, though his voice stayed unervingly calm. "So you figured you'd do me a favor by putting a bullet in my head?" "I was young and stupid and in love," Wesley said, breaking down into sobs. "Elizabeth told me we could be happy together, that Ryan needed a real father, someone who'd actually be there for him. She said the insurance money would give us a fresh start. Ezekiel's jaw clenched, his voice quieter now, but edged with bitterness. Ryan was already your son, Wesley. You didn't have to kill me to be his father. All you had to do was tell me the truth. Wesley's eyes widened, his mouth parting slightly in disbelief. You knew. I know now. Ezekiel said, staring at him. I've had 7 years to think about a lot of things, Wesley. 7 years of living in shelters and back alleys while the two people I trusted most decided I was worth more dead than alive. Wesley crumpled into the chair behind him, burying his face in his hands. I never stopped feeling guilty. Every single day for the past 7 years, I've wished I could undo it. I see your face in my sleep. I can't eat. I can't function. I can't live with myself. Good, Ezekiel said coldly. You shouldn't be able to live with yourself. But as he watched Wesley break down completely, slumped and sobbing uncontrollably, the satisfaction Ezekiel had expected didn't come. He didn't feel vindicated or powerful. He just felt tired. Tired of carrying the weight of betrayal. Tired of the anger, the nightmares, the hollow ache that never left. The confrontation had given him the truth, but not peace. Still, that truth was all he needed to finally act. News of the arrests broke the following week, shaking their upscale community to its core. Elizabeth and Wesley, the couple once seen as an emblem of resilience after unimaginable loss, were now the center of a criminal investigation more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Friends, neighbors, former colleagues, none of them had suspected what lay beneath the surface of their carefully curated life. Ezekiel's reappearance had stunned the public. To the outside world, he had been dead and buried in memory, a victim of a tragic crime. But he had returned with a vengeance, exposing the web of lies that Elizabeth and Wesley had spun so skillfully. The man declared legally dead had come back to tell the story no one ever thought they'd hear. Elizabeth, defiant and poised, hired a high-powered legal team the best money could buy, ironically paid for with the same life insurance money she had claimed from Ezekiel's supposed death. In court, her defense painted her as the true victim. Her lawyers claimed she had been manipulated, gaslit, and abused for years. They said Ezekiel had controlled her every move, emotionally isolated her, and made her fear for her life. According to their version, Elizabeth hadn't been a mastermind, she had been a woman trapped and desperate, coerced by Wesley into a plan she never wanted. But Wesley's confession unraveled her defense thread by thread. He took the stand trembling, his voice filled with remorse. His confession was raw and comprehensive. We were in love for years before it happened, Wesley said, eyes lowered, barely able to look at Ezekiel in the courtroom. Elizabeth told me the only way we could ever be together was if he was gone. She said he'd never let her go, that he'd fight for custody, that we'd be poor forever. She wanted a new life, and the only way to get it was with that insurance money. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. It was Elizabeth who came up with the plan. She did the research. She looked up how to stage a mugging. She increased the policy behind his back. She timed everything, picked the night, picked the route. I went along with it because I was in love and too much of a coward to stop her. He finally looked at Elizabeth, expressionless, cold in her seat. I thought I was doing it for love. But she never looked back. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She said it was done and we were free. She wasn't scared. She was focused. She planned everything with this cold logic. No remorse. No hesitation. Just the future she envisioned with me. The courtroom was packed as the prosecution laid out its final pieces of evidence, financial records that told a story starkly at odds with Elizabeth's public persona as a grieving widow. Jurors sat stiffly as the prosecutor displayed charts and bank statements, each one a nail in the coffin of her credibility. While Mrs. Smith claimed to be mourning her husband's death, the prosecutor said, pointing to a series of luxury purchases, she spent thousands of dollars on designer clothing, jewelry, spa treatments, and international vacations. This wasn't a woman devastated by loss. This was someone enjoying the rewards of a carefully executed plan. Photos of Elizabeth posing in exotic locations, smiling in the arms of Wesley, flashed across the screen. All of this, the prosecutor continued, paid for by the life insurance money from a man they left for dead. The jury's expressions ranged from stunned to disgusted. And sitting just behind the bar, Ezekiel remained composed, though his hands clenched into tight fists in his lap. The case was airtight. Wesley's tearful confession had laid bare the plot's timeline and motivations. Ezekiel's own powerful testimony provided the human context, a man who had lived through hell, whose identity and life had been stolen from him. Together with the damning financial trail, it became impossible for the defense to spin the narrative in Elizabeth's favor. Still, the most heartbreaking part of the proceedings came when Ezekiel addressed the court about Ryan. He stood at the witness stand, voice thick with emotion. "Ryan's 14 now," he said. "He thinks Wesley is his father. He thinks I was killed in a random act of violence." He paused, struggling to steady himself. "The truth is, I'm not his biological father. I didn't know that for most of his life. But I raised him. I bathed him. I read to him. I held his hand when he was scared. Every sacrifice I made was for him. Every late night at the office, every decision, I did it all thinking he was my son." His eyes met the judge's. "He may not be my blood, but he was my son in every way that mattered." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the most hardened journalists at the press bench looked away, some blinking back tears. "I could have used that truth to strengthen my case," Ezekiel continued quietly. "But I won't. Ryan is innocent in all of this. He's already had too much taken from him. I'm asking the court to seal any details regarding his paternity. He deserves peace. He deserves a chance at a future not overshadowed by the crimes of the adults around him." The judge nodded solemnly. "Your request will be honored." 6 weeks after the trial began, the jury returned with its verdict. Wesley was found guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. His cooperation with the investigation and visible remorse were considered during sentencing. The judge handed down a 25-year prison term. Elizabeth's verdict was the same, but the outcome for her was far worse. She had fought the charges bitterly, denying everything, shifting blame, and spinning false narratives even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Her courtroom demeanor, cold, calculated, unyielding, only reinforced what Wesley's confession had described: a woman unmoved by conscience, focused only on control. The sentence: life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Outside the criminal trial, the insurance company swiftly filed a civil suit to recover the $1 million it had paid out. The court ordered the liquidation of all assets acquired with that money. The family home, once the symbol of Elizabeth and Wesley's new life, was sold. Their luxury vehicles were seized. Jewelry, clothing, and every last indulgence purchased on Ezekiel's back was cataloged and reclaimed. They had lost everything: property, freedom, reputation. All that remained was the legacy of their betrayal. At sentencing, the courtroom fell silent as the judge leaned forward and delivered the final condemnation. "This court has seen many cases driven by greed and betrayal," the judge began, voice unwavering. "But rarely have I encountered such calculated cruelty, paired with such a deeply personal violation of trust. You didn't just attempt to murder Mr. Smith for financial gain. You shattered a family, traumatized a child, and inflicted profound suffering on a man who loved and trusted you completely." The judge turned toward Elizabeth, eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Smith, you stood before your husband and took vows to love and honor him. Instead, you conspired to end his life. You looked him in the eyes every day while secretly plotting his murder. You weaponized his love and devotion. The court finds no redeeming or mitigating factors in your conduct." The judge's voice remained even, but the weight behind his words was unmistakable as he turned to Wesley Johnson. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "you betrayed a friendship that spanned decades. You exploited the trust of a man who considered you his brother. While your cooperation with the court is noted, it does not absolve the fundamental cruelty and treachery at the heart of your actions." Wesley sat with his head bowed, his face pale and drawn. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with judgment and consequence. At the conclusion of this trial, the judge continued, "The court hands down the following sentences." The gavel of justice struck with firm finality. For attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud, Wesley Johnson is hereby sentenced to 25 years in state prison. Wesley blinked hard, as though the sentence, though expected, still hit with stunning force. "Your confession helped bring the truth to light," the judge said, his tone softening only slightly. "But it does not undo the betrayal or the pain you caused." Then the judge turned to Elizabeth. "Elizabeth Smith," he said, "you were convicted of the same charges. But unlike Mr. Johnson, you showed no remorse. You orchestrated a plan to murder your husband and profit from his death. You will now live with the consequences of your choices." The judge's eyes didn't waver. "You are sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years." Elizabeth sat stone-faced, her features tight, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The sentence hung in the air like a bell tolling the end of an era. Afterward, the court turned to a more delicate matter: the future of Ryan. Though the boy was not Ezekiel's biological son, his connection to the child was clear. His care, his sacrifices, and the love he had shown were undeniable. The courtroom listened quietly as the judge delivered his ruling. "Mr. Smith may not be this child's biological parent," the judge said, addressing Ezekiel, "but he was the only father Ryan knew for the first 7 years of his life. He provided for him, loved him, and sacrificed for him. This court believes that remaining with Mr. Smith serves Ryan's best interests. Full legal custody is hereby granted to Mr. Ezekiel Smith. Ezekiel closed his eyes briefly, a wave of relief and responsibility washing over him. He gave a single nod, quiet, composed as the weight of his new duty settled on his shoulders. He didn't speak ill of Elizabeth or Wesley to Ryan. Never once. Whatever bitterness he carried, he buried it for the sake of the boy. He focused on healing, on rebuilding a life for both of them, even if the pieces never quite fit the way they once had. But time, as always, brought its own trials. For years passed. One evening, not long before Ryan's 18th birthday, Ezekiel was standing in the kitchen when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Ryan in the hallway, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The boy, no, the young man now stood there with red-rimmed eyes and an expression Ezekiel hadn't seen before, resolve wrapped in sorrow. "I'm leaving," Ryan said simply. Ezekiel felt something cold settle in his chest. "Ryan, what?" Ryan looked at him, eyes brimming with regret. "You've been good to me," he said. "Better than I deserved. But I can't stay here anymore pretending everything's okay. I look in the mirror, and all I see is him. Wesley, my father. And I know what he did to you." Ezekiel stepped forward. His voice was low, but firm. "You are not your father." Ryan's lips trembled slightly. "Maybe not. But I carry his name, his blood. And I can't carry that here anymore, not under your roof. I need to go. I'm sorry for what he did to you, Ezekiel. I'm so sorry." There was nothing more to say. Without waiting for a response, Ryan turned and walked out the door. Ezekiel stood in the hallway, unmoving, the silence stretching around him. He watched his son in every way that mattered, walk away, carrying the weight of a legacy he never asked for. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.